Hello and welcome back to my channel. On this video, I'm going to talk about the 22 books that I'm going to try to read in December of 2022. And this year I have decided to give myself a challenge of reading 22 books every month of the year. And thus far I've been able to do it. It's the last month that I'm having that challenge and we'll see if I can make it with another 22 books. But I'm optimistic that I'll be able to wrap up this challenge. And so what I typically do on these videos is I have 17 books that I pick out ahead of time, books that I'm hoping to read over the course of the month. And then I also pick out 5 random books using my alphabet challenge, where I pick a random letter from the alphabet and then pick 5 books that I'm interested in reading that I already own off of my Kindle. And that adds up to 22 books for the month. So let's go ahead and get started with the 17 books that I have already chosen to try to read this month. So the first book I have on my list is one by April Rinn called Flux, 8 Superpowers for Thriving in Constant Change. I stumbled across this book because April Rinn had written an article in like Forbes or something like that about the concept of a career portfolio, which I find really interesting. And she has a whole chapter on that in this book. And so I decided to pick it up. So I actually purchased this book because I figured it's one of those ones I'd like to add to my personal library, and I'm going to read it over the course of this month. I also decided to add to my list Greg McKeown's Effortless, Make It Easier to Do What Matters Most. This is, I think, a follow-up to his book on essentialism, which I also really enjoyed. And I really like books on simplicity and minimalism. So I thought that as we round out the year and head toward the new year, it's probably a good topic to dive into. I also decided to pick up Julie Clark's newest book, The Lies I Tell. I just read her other book, The Last Flight, in November, so you can go back to my November TBR if you want to see what I thought about that book, but I did really enjoy it. And this is a book, I think, about a woman who's a con artist and has multiple different identities, and there's another woman who's trying to kind of have her be like found out, and I'm not entirely sure why. Like many books I add to my pile, I don't exactly know what the plot is, but because I like the other book so much, I thought I would pick it up. Catherine Center's Things You Save in a Fire is getting added to my list again because I didn't get around to it the last time. This is about a female firefighter in Texas and is a romance novel. I really like Catherine Center's work, so I'm picking that up. I also decided to add to my list The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston, and this is a book that I've been hearing a lot about. I think New York Times added it as one of its notable books of the year. It is a romance about a woman who's a ghostwriter for a romance novelist, and then she gets a new editor. She's having a hard time finishing her most recent assignment because she no longer believes in love. So excited to pick up that. Then I also decided to pick up a trilogy of books all set in a small town called Moose Springs, Alaska. And these are books that I picked because they're definitely seasonal for the Christmas holiday season. The first one is called The Tourist Attraction. The second one is called Mistletoe and Mr. Right. And then the third one is called Enjoy the View. And these are all kind of small town romances that I thought would be fun and seasonal to pick up in December. Another romance that I decided to pick up is one called The Bromance Book Club by Lyssa Kay Adams. I've been hearing a lot of really good things about this series. This is the first one in the series, and it's basically about a bunch of men who have a book club, and one of them is having challenges in his marriage, and so they talk about it at this book club. I think it's really kind of rare to have a romance with a lot of male perspectives, and so I'm curious about how the author does this. Also added back onto my list is Night Road by Kristen Hanna. I'm having a hard time actually reading this one, even though I've added it to my list multiple times. I've really enjoyed a couple other books I've read by Kristen Hanna, so I'd like to work my way through her backlist over time. I also added The Passengers by John Mars. I recently read The One by John Mars and really loved it, so I wanted to try another one of his books. This is about a self-driving car, or a series of self-driving cars that get hacked, and then there are 8 different people in the cars, and the person who hacks them is like making the public decide who lives and dies, like who crashes and who doesn't crash. So sounds interesting. Thought I would pick that one up. I also decided to add to my list A Cosmic Kind of Love by Samantha Young. This is another book I've heard really good things about. It is another romance about an event planner and an astronaut. And so I thought it sounded kind of interesting. I don't know much about it other than that, so I added it to my list. And then I also have the 17th book in the Armand Kamaj series. This is the final book that I had assigned myself in this series to read this year, called The Madness of Crowds. There is an 18th book that just released in November of this year, so I may have one more book that I have to track down and read in the series just to get current with the series, which was my goal this year. And really looking forward to another book in the series. I think that this one, I don't even know the plot of this one. I haven't looked ahead. I've just enjoyed them. These are basically small town mysteries about a chief inspector in Canada. And I would say some people might call them cozy mysteries, although there is violence that's included in them. But I've loved this series, would highly recommend. I also added to my list, again, The Rise of Magics. This is the third book in the Chronicles of the One series by Nora Roberts. I really enjoyed the first two, would love to get the third one done before the end of the year. We'll see if I can do that. And then from a recommendation on social media, I added a book called The Impossible Us by Sarah Lotz. I don't know much about this book other than I think it's kind of an unconventional romance. I've heard really good things about it, and I was able to get it on audio, so looking forward to reading that. And then the last two books I have on my predetermined list are the last two books in the Wheel of Time series. So 13 and 14. The first one, Towers of Midnight, and the second one is A Memory of Light by Robert Jordan. These are the last two books in this series that are also co-written by Brandon Sanderson, because Robert Jordan was dying, and then he did die, and Brandon Sanderson finished this series. So the last three books of this series, one of which I read in November, are the ones that are co-written. So I'm excited to wrap up this series. It's been a lot of my time and energy throughout this year reading it, and I've just really enjoyed it. So excited to see where that goes. So those are my 17 books that I have chosen, and now I'm going to open up my Kindle here and pick a letter for my alphabet challenge so I can pick out some random books to also add to my list. Okay, so the letter I have chosen is P. And now I go into my Kindle and I sort alphabetically, and I see what is in my P list. All right, so let me glance through here and see what I might want to find. The first ones that are coming up are part of a series, and I'm not entirely sure what they start with. Okay, so some of these series books, this series is called something that starts with a letter, but not the actual books. And so if I want to be very clear about what I'm doing here, I got to look and see what's going on there. Okay. So let's see. The first book I'm going to choose is one called The Pathless Path, Imagining a New Story for Work and Life by Paul Millerd. And I stumbled across this. I'm not entirely sure where I first heard of it, but I'm always interested in people's paths and journeys that are kind of unconventional. And I think this book falls into that category. So I'm going to pick that one up. I am also going to pick up The Patron Saint of Liars by Ann Patchett. I have wanted to read this book forever. I think I've probably actually started it a couple of times and I've never gotten through it. So this is a wonderful excuse to pick up that book. So I'm going to add that as well. Let's see. There are quite a few here, so I'm just glancing through. I am also going to pick up Piranesi by Susanna Clark, a book that I've heard a ton of really good things about, so I'm very curious to hear and to read that and kind of see how it is. I cannot help myself. I'm going to pick up a book called The Plight Before Christmas by Kate Stewart, just because it's holiday themed and it looks like fun. So I'm going to go ahead and pick that one up as well. And let's see here. There's quite a few options, and I only have one left. I may regret this, because I think it's really long. But I want to read, and actually let me make sure this is the first in the series before I commit to this. It is the first in the series. Okay, I'm gonna read a book called The Poppy War, which I have just heard really good things about, and I don't know much about it, and I think it's probably really long. It is described as a brilliantly imaginative talent, makes her exciting debut with this epic historical military fantasy. I don't read a lot of historical or military or fantasy, so I'm willing to kind of give that one a try and see what I think about that. So let me just scroll back and make sure that was 5. And it was. So those are the 5 books I'm going to add to my list for December. Make sure to check back at the end of the month with my debrief video to see how many books I actually was able to get through this month. And until then, happy reading.